Is it working now? Maybe. Perhaps. Sorry about that, everyone. The interwebs, as it were, does not want to play nice right now. By the way, I need to do something real quick. Let's go in here and complete all the existing rewards because tonight, as we are going to be playing, or rather, playing, God, how to tell that I don't read often. Tonight, as we're going to be reading Creepypasta, and I'm going to hop over to that part. Um, Obviously, the redeems for sound and whatnot are going to not be a thing. So if you redeem something on accident, I will be refunding that by the end of the stream, and hopefully my brain will start functioning in such a way that I know what I'm trying to say to you all. Give me a break, it's almost the end of the year. Anyway, one moment. Tonight our sips are going to be working in a different way. Tonight, they will in fact just be happening between stories because that makes life easier, I think. Something to let exactly, Ace. Well, I appreciate the attempt, but I'll refund that for you later. Um, but how are you, Eggs? What is that? Oh, activity feed. We're just going to start this off. Let me give you the quick disclaimer here. I have not pre read any of these stories. These are stories that I have located through the Creepypasta Wiki, which states that unless otherwise notated somewhere else, these are all free use and license free. As such, I do hope you guys enjoy it tonight. Hi. We're going to be starting out with one called A Christmas Story by Dr. Bob Smith. Oh, as the phone goes off. Let me reread that and get that started. A Christmas Story by Dr. Bob Smith. My name is Sean O'Brien. I'm 14. It's an awful feeling when you realize you don't resemble your mother or father. I love mom and dad. If they had lied and told me they had adopted me through an agency, I would have believed it. End of story. My parents kept saying I would resemble them more as I grew, but the older I got, the less I appeared like either of them. They're tall and thin. I'm short with blonde hair, blue eyes, and a plump belly. Both have flaming red hair and green eyes. Their ears are rounded, and mine are deformed with a pronounced enough point that I wear my long hair to. Or I. Mine are deformed with a pronounced enough point that I wear my hair long to cover it up. They're both great, but not very intelligent. I earned a full scholarship to St. Joseph's Preparatory Academy, the #1 Catholic school in Philadelphia. Dad still can't grow a mustache, and I began shaving when I was 11. Razor burn on my acne made me stop. Now I have the best beard in the prep, even though I am a freshman. When I mentioned my problem during confession, Father Mulcahy said I probably got my features from other ancestors. He said that he didn't look He said that he didn't look like his parents, but was the spitting image of his grandfather. Pulled out the family photo albums, except that their hair was long. Didn't look like either grandma or grandpa in their Woodstock era wedding pictures. Didn't favor my great grandfather as he stood by his World War II P-51 Mustang. Then I searched the family websites and found pictures going back to 1882. Every man had the same massive eyebrows. All my parents' ancestors had close-set little eyes, long, narrow noses with a bulbous tip, broad cheeks, and a rounded chin. Nobody had my upturned nose, big twinkling eyes, square chin, or delicate cheekbones. I did what any kid in my circumstances would do. When they were out, I searched for adoption papers. They're both clutterbugs. When they came back, they found me cleaning up and arranging everything. When I read on the internet about people who were adopted and found their real family through genetic testing, I even bought a 23andMe test kit. I expected them to tell me something like I was Polish and have a second cousin in Chicago. Instead, they said the sample was unreadable. After I tried again with the replacement kit they sent, they emailed me the same thing. Finally, they said I was playing games with them by sending non-human DNA and refunded my money. That was bizarre. I had to find the truth. I asked to spend Thanksgiving break with my Aunt Bridget, Mom's sister, while her son Ryan went to Philadelphia. Her family still lived in Scituate? I can't pronounce that. Massachusetts, where Mom and Dad grew up. Our clan has been there since Miles O'Brien arrived from Ireland in 1847. They adopted me. The record would be in Brookton, the seat of Plymouth County. If they adopted me, the record would be in Brookton, the seat of Plymouth County. Aunt Bridget asked me to take Bruno, her German Shepherd, out for a run, so I took him to St. Mary's Cemetery on Meeting House Lane. Our family has been buried there since the Civil War. As we played fetch with his squeaky green bottle, I walked back and forth and read the gravestones of my ancestors. Then I came to one that made me shit my pants. My name, my birthday, and my parents' names. I was dead. Bruno understood my pain the way dogs always do, so he leaned into me and gave me a big doggy hug. When I recovered, I took pictures of the headstone. It was real. The town newspaper was named the town newspaper was named the Navigator. I read had died of inoperable in I read I had died of inoperable congenital heart disease. Printed out my obituary and my picture of the tombstone and showed my aunt. Tell me the truth, I said. Who am I? She became white. I can't say. Then she drove me to the South Station in Boston and tossed me on the first train to Philadelphia. Ryan stayed the break with us. I was a stranger in my own house. Dad and Ryan played Destiny 2 together on the PS4. Shooting fake monsters bores me to death, so I hung in my room and did Raspberry Pi programming to make an advent calendar for Mom. I enjoy creating things. Our family has several unusual Christmas traditions. Mom always told me Santa Claus wasn't real bought as they brought out the presents. They also left a fifth of green spot Irish whiskey and a glass on the coffee table. Every Christmas morning I found the bottle on the floor and empty, yet Mom and Dad smelled fresh and acted sober as judges. I was dying to know what strange ritual they did every year with the whiskey. So I plugged a cheap digital camera into the Raspberry Pi advent calendar and I hid it in the gold bow and holly. I sat in my room and read, watching the living room on my computer. I waited and watched, and nothing happened. By 2 in the morning, I was dead tired and convinced that I was an absolute moron. Right before I was going to quit, though, I saw the impossible on my computer. A man in a red fur suit crawled out of the fireplace. His face blew my mind. He looked just like me. I rushed out to the living room, my jelly belly trembling with rage. "You!" I shouted. "Sean, you have been a very good boy," he said condescendingly. "What toy would you like?" "Answers. Who am I? Why am I here?" He looked me square in the eye. "Wouldn't you rather learn how to make that bully Stan Kowalski's head fly off? I guarantee he will never bother you again." I shook my head. "Answer my questions." Santa held up his hand and the bottle leaped into it. He took a long drink and left the bottle hanging in midair. Then he pulled out a pipe from his jacket and lit it with a snap of his fingers. "Things are different at the North Pole than you imagine. We work and snuggle to stay warm, and we share the love if you catch my drift." He winked and then took another hit. "It was early 2005. We had been working hard at tooling up production of the Tamagotchi Connection virtual pets. Finally, Tina, the manager of the project, solved the problems. That night we celebrated. She partied a bit too hardy and started to massage my shoulders. One thing led to another. Tina had no interest in you or anything else that would slow down her rise to CEO. When she gave you to us, Miss Claus told me to get rid of you, or she would toss you outside for the polar bears. I couldn't let that happen." "You cheated on your wife? I'm your love child and you dumped me off here?" "Yes, but no. First, my wife cheated on me centuries before I returned the favor. She's made 24 bastard children of her own. My bitch of a mother banished me to Bulgaria just because I have a club foot. I watched both your parents their whole lives, and they were such good people. They had a terribly hard time getting pregnant. They even wrote me and said a baby was the only present they ever wanted. The first Sean Seamus O'Brien dying shattered them, and I wanted you to have adopted parents like mine. When you consider it rationally, I did the best thing for everyone. Your parents are so grateful for you that every Christmas they give me a gift." This was too incredible. This was too incredible to believe. "You're telling me my mother is an elf?" He pulled back his hair, showing an ear shaped like mine. "We are the Dark Elves. Don't us under don't underestimate our power. With a word, I could destroy this planet." "Like Darth Vader, the dark side of the elven force?" He snorted. Whiskey and Pope. He snorted. Whiskey and smoke sprang from his nose. Then he rolled up his sleeve, showing his incredible Hulk huge arm muscles. "Darth Vader is a pussy," he said in a deep rumble. "My cargo load this year is over 1,000,000 tons, and I fly it at almost the speed of light with my magic. I would ram that lightsaber so far up his ass, it would come out the top of his head." That doesn't sound like the Santa Claus I know. He laughed wickedly. You have been watching too many TV specials. Who do you think my boss is? Who funds the whole operation? Oh, oh, okay. Oh no. That's why the Dark Lord set me up in business. There is a God-shaped hole in the human heart at Christmas more than any other time. Humans know they can only fill it by serving others. My master wants them to try to fill it with things. Dark Lord is your master. He certainly hasn't kept it a secret. My real name is Hephaestus, but he makes me use his names. Santa is Satan. Just move 2 letters. Take Saint out of old Saint Nick. And what you have? Another name for Satan. I knew he spoke the truth. Everything from Christmas shopping shootings over Walmart parking spaces to the government banning Jesus proved it. That advent calendar is fantastic. Such imagination. I could use you in corporate HQ. Learn who and what you really are. Get into the family business. He took a hit on his pipe and blew smoke rings that turned into $signs. There's a reason I can keep a full workforce up at the North Pole. Our Lord pays better than anyone. I said something I never thought possible, but I meant every word. No, my family is here. They're the ones who love me. You have no idea what you're missing, but I won't force you. He stretched out his hand and a golden whistle appeared. Blow this if you ever change your mind. With that, he finished the whiskey, dropped the bottle, and climbed back up the chimney. I sat, trying to absorb everything, then I realized I didn't hear Dad's bandsaw snoring. He was down the hall, just out of my sight. I'm sorry, son. You had to find the truth yourself. You could never believe us if we told you. I smiled. You're right. I picked up the discarded bottle and put it in the trash in the kitchen. Go back to bed. It's almost morning. Tomorrow will be the best Christmas ever. And that's the end of that one. What'd you guys think? Certainly an interesting tale. Um, I honestly, I was more expecting his father to be Krampus than you know, Satan Santa Claus, but it was interesting. It scared you with the iconicness. Well, those things happen. And as I said earlier, we're gonna be doing sip between stories, so I'm gonna get some sip. I need all of you to get some sip as well. So give me one sec here. Oh, ironicness. Okay. Oh no, I just read it wrong. My bad. Okay. So there are a lot of Christmas ones on this list. I am going to leave it to you, eggs. Do we want another Christmas one? What might be my only New Year's one, or what may very well be my only Krampus one? Pick one of the three. I will grab from there. Krampus. Okay. So let me actually scroll up so that I do not screw this up. Okay. All right. So this one, I'm gonna have to refund you for that, eggs. None of those are working because otherwise people could totally troll me while I'm reading, and I'd like to try to be able to cut these up and actually put them online. Okay, so save this one. Yeah, don't worry, they'll be on in the next one. And actually, while I'm at it, let me try to find. Um. Oof. Well, this will be a little hard. We'll just open up another browser and do it that way. Go away. No. Shut up. Alright, so we're going to mute that. What I really need to find out is if these things are DRM free. I would love that. Let me check this playlist real quick. We'll see if it's considered DRM free. And if it is, I will start using this music. Never mind, I can't tell right now. Oh no, you're fine. You're fine, X. Let's see if this is the kind of stuff we're looking for. It's supposed to be DRM free. That's only. Here we go. An hour long. Just desperately have to hope that they don't throw out any commercials while we're doing this. Anyway, here we go. A Krampus Carol by Jack Wick. If there was anyone to be found on Santa's naughty list, it was surely Cindy's older sister, Maddie. Cindy was 8, and Maddie was 3 years more, and had never said a thing to Cindy in her life, or so it seemed. Cindy's my favorite. Cindy's so pretty. Cindy this, Cindy that. These were the words from Maddie's mother that rang in Maddie's head through every day of the year, but especially around Christmas time, when Cindy was talking sweetly off gift giving and decorating and loving her family and friends. Cindy was sweet, but it was authentic. All she really wanted was to be loved by Maddie, the way she herself loved Maddie. Since Cindy was a baby, Maddie hadn't liked her. Some of Cindy's earliest memories revolved around the constant sideways looks she would receive from Maddie, the passive aggression, the endless competitions from Mom's affection. The endless competitions for Mom's affection. Cindy was always the one to receive it, but on certain days, she would ask her mother to pay Maddie some more attention. Oh, your sister's fine. Her mother would say, your sister gets plenty of attention. And And after saying this, her mother would usually give Maddie a half-hearted pat on the head and go back to giving Cindy all the affection a child would ever need. It left a hollow place in Cindy, and when she tried to give Maddie the love she so desperately needed, Maddie would shun Cindy as if Cindy were a leper. Now, this year, Maddie had been extra bitter. Perhaps it was the additional attention Cindy garnered for her performance in the school's Christmas play. Or maybe it was the way Mom constantly bragged about Cindy's acting.
She's the next Meryl Streep, I'm telling you,
Cindy's mother would brag. But whatever the reason, Maddie took every chance she saw to torment her younger sister. Let's turn that down a little so it'll be a little more backgroundy. But whatever the reason, Maddie took every chance she saw to torment her younger sister. Cindy woke up one morning with gum in her hair. Another day, she found that her underwear was soaked in honey. Her favorite dolls would go missing. The TV in her room, which Maddie wasn't allowed to have, was constantly unplugged. Yet, Cindy's desire for her sister's acceptance continued through the month of December. She continued to be kind. She persisted in giving Maddie compliments when Mother did not. The gift at the top of Maddie's Christmas list was a brand new makeup kit. Cindy made sure that she would be the one to give it to her Christmas morning. Despite all this, Cindy had felt a wear and tear from all of Maddie's torments throughout the month, and it all came to a breaking point on Christmas Eve. The family sat at the Christmas Eve dinner table and ate ham and mashed potatoes and Christmas cookies. Cindy's mother had been bragging shamelessly all night long about Cindy's acting. There was no mention of Maddie, not at any point. Maddie was stewing, and Cindy could see it. At one point, through all of the bragging and praising and gloating, Maddie chimed in.
I don't think Cindy's acting is that good,
she said, matter-of-factly. It was through a bomb. It was as though a bomb had gone off in the room. Everyone looked at Maddie like they were unsure they'd heard correctly. It was like blasphemy.
What kind of thing is that to say?
Asked Mother. Maddie shrugged.
I don't know,
said Maddie.
I just think you're exaggerating a little bit. I mean, she's decent.
All of the memories of Maddie's torments began to broil and fester in Cindy's mind. Now here was Maddie disparaging Cindy at the dinner table in front of the entire family, in front of all of the aunts and uncles and cousins and friends.
At least I'm good at something,
Cindy blurted. And just like that, Maddie retracted into a pit of shame. Cindy's words ringing true and humiliating. Mother added fuel to the fire by shrugging at Maddie in a matter-of-fact manner.
Your sister has a point,
said Mother. Cindy felt horrible as she watched Maddie sulk and trudge off toward the bathroom like a beaten dog. Cindy hated the power she held in her hands. That night, everyone hunkered down in their beds and waited for Santa to leave his gifts below the tree. But Cindy had trouble sleeping. It was not midnight now. Cindy rarely found herself awake at this hour, but she knew why. Cindy removed her covers and hopped out of bed and tiptoed across her room. She was careful not to wake anyone. She opened her closet and grabbed Maddie's wrapped gift. She tiptoed down the dark hallway and dragged her fingers along the walls so as not to stumble around in the dark.
I'll give Maddie her gift and tell her I'm sorry and tell her I love her.
Cindy thought to herself.
That's what I'll do. And she'll be happy and she'll forgive me and maybe she'll even say she loves me too.
When Cindy arrived outside of Maddie's door, she heard strange shuffling noises coming from inside. Perhaps Maddie was preparing another prank for Cindy. No matter. Cindy was going to walk in and give Maddie her present and try to make amends. Cindy opened the door just a crack. She was careful not to startle Maddie. It was so dark inside the room and she couldn't see a thing. But she could hear a great deal of shuffling inside the room. Cindy stared into the room for quite some time, patiently waiting for her eyes to adjust to the gloom. When her eyes adjusted, she saw an empty bed. She saw Maddie's wide open window. She saw a 7-foot figure standing in the shadows. She saw the rounded cage upon its back, and she saw Maddie sitting in the cage like a frightened bird. As Cindy's terrified eyes adjusted through the dark, she saw the figure more clearly. It had a goat's head with large horns on top. Its eyes were red and impish and hostile. It wore a suit much like Santa Claus, and it even had jingling sleigh bells hanging from a few ends of the garments. Cindy stood frozen with fear as the creature glanced at her and gave her a nod and wink. The creature made its way toward the window. As it did, the last Cindy saw of her sister was a look of fear and sadness and regret. And then the creature left us as Cindy stood there with the present in her hands. Down the chimney he will come, with his great big grin, and you'll find that even the kitties are very liable to sin. What will Krampus say when he finds everybody sinning? What will Krampus say when he hears them sin, sinning? Alright, well, I hope you liked your choice, Eggs. I'm gonna let this one go and we'll pause and we'll restart the song as we go. But yeah, I hope you guys liked that one. That was an interesting one. Though I felt like the payoff was a little, I don't know, lacking at the end. I honestly kind of felt like we should have gone downstairs and found him there, and then maybe Krampus takes her through the chimney or something. Of course, perhaps I'm just perhaps I'm just spoiled by that Krampus movie from a couple years back. That one was pretty good. All right, 1 sec. I'm slowly removing these title cards as we go. All right. Let's get this one back to the top. Ooh. Now, hey, don't be saying that. Krampus might take those who are bad, but at the same time, wishing for Krampus to take people is also considered bad karma, I'd think. Okay, so keep in mind again with these that I did sort through a couple. I didn't actually read them, but I read some of the comments below because, if somebody said, "Oh my God, this is absolute garbage," and nobody was there to redeem it, I felt like saving you guys the trouble and not reading those. Um. Ah. Well, that's a discussion we could get into. It's really a philosophical thing regarding how you feel the state of the world is currently. Because if you think about it, as the world potentially gets more grim, is it possible that Krampus is in fact bringing people here as opposed to taking them elsewhere? Hmm? Something to consider. Well, we're just gonna let the music keep going. Good thing it's all DRM free. One day I'll have the stream deck so I can actually give you guys a thumbs up easier. Anyway, we're gonna do one with a very long title now. This is one of the New Year's ones. It's called. Theoretically, this is probably actually a date because I don't know how the whole Roman numbers work. I know they get crazy after a while, but oh, see, eggs. I'm not gonna. I'll do that for you a bit later. I don't want to read it in it because I'm gonna be throwing these online on the YouTubes. Actually, eggs, find me a creepy pasta that you want me to read. I will read that one. Make sure it's from the creepypasta wiki. It's I'll give you the link. And make sure at the bottom it doesn't say that it has an extra thing, and then I will read that in the Irish for you. I'm just gonna find you on Discord. I'm so confused. Like I said, make sure this one is something that's on the wiki, and it's got to say at the bottom. Wow, this one's really short. Um, Content is available under CC BY-SA. I'll let you choose whichever you want, but if you can make it more festive, please try to. Alright, so I will probably butcher this name. KXXV, New Year's Day Interruption, by Postu Henin. At 1:42 a.m. on New Year's Day on 2002, the ABC television station in Waco, Texas, named KXXV was hacked into and a creepy broadcast was sent over the airwaves. Not many people know about it since most people were asleep by 1:42 in the morning. And very few of the people still awake were watching KXXV. You know what, guys? I'm going to start this one over. I need to find some different music for us. Because it started with the. No. Started with a crazy pitter patter of the different instruments, and it's not the creepy vibe I'm going for. Is this one? It's D&D RPG, but is it? No, that one's definitely not DRM free. How about this one? Is this free? Ah, I swear I had one that was saved at one point. Is that the one I was just watching? Sorry for the hold up, folks. Reuse. Okay, I'm gonna hope for the best with this one. All of these have the title royalty free, so fingers crossed, and we will start over. So let us re-begin this one. KXXV. Yes, eggs. What? Also, if you're gonna send it, make sure you send it back through Discord, please. I don't know what the delay is right now. I hope it's not too long. Yeah. Hold on. Okay. Sent. Alright, I'm going to do this one now. Let's crank it up a little more. KXXV. New York. KXXV. New Year's Day Interruption. By Postu Hennen. At 1:42 a.m. on New Year's Day of 2002, the ABC television station in Waco, Texas, named KXXV was hacked into, and a creepy broadcast was sent over the airways. Not many people know about it since most people were asleep by 1:42 in that morning, and very few people were still awake watching KXXV. The few that were, however, reported seeing static run over the usual talk show that aired at this hour. The static lasted for 15 seconds before an image suddenly appeared on screen. It was a distorted image of someone's face. Someone with a balding head and a wide smile. The distortion also made their eyes appear large and glassy. Their teeth looked long like a rodent's. The image was also accompanied by a startlingly loud, deep rumbling noise. Some say that it resembled actual human speech, though it was too low pitched to make out. This image, as well as the audio clip played alongside, lasted for about 90 seconds total. Finally, another 15-second long burst of static came on screen, and the station cut back to the usual talk show. But there have been some strange reports over the years. Rumors say that about a week after the incident occurred, 3 of the 8 people known to have watched it that night were deemed legally insane and sent to the Texas Department of Mental Health Services. When asked by interviewers what they saw that night, they would only say, "He's after us all," and "the demon making things red." When asked what they meant, they would reply that they heard what the figure was saying quite clearly, even though the other reports, including the ones filed by people who watched the recording of the video, mentioned the rumbling being too deep to understand. These people mentioned that the voice was saying things like, "Suck their souls," and "watching all," though they refused to explain what these things meant. They also reported that the supposed image was actually a video, and that the being's head was shaking violently, his eyes darting back and forth and his mouth moving with whatever he said. All other reports say that the image was indeed a still one. Following the incident, people made efforts to track down the person who hacked KXXV that fateful New Year's Eve. that fateful New Year's Day, but to no avail. However, it did turn out that someone had a recording of it. Mr. Albert Finster, who was going to a party on New Year's Eve but wanted to watch the local news coverage of the event, had been recording KXXV that morning, having started recording at 10:01 p.m. and finished at 8:33 a.m. the next day. Within the recording was the incident. Unfortunately, the VHS was somewhat corrupted, so that the only known footage of the incident is messed up almost beyond recognition. Beneath is the still out of the only 45 seconds of the incident footage that wasn't messed up by corruption. It is still partially corrupted, though, as a red afterimage haunts the left side of the screen. Fortunately, there's nothing I can share for that. Huh. Okay, Eggs, let me take a look at this. It's the unceremonious hop out and back in of the of the story. That one was short, interesting concept. That some people saw things that others didn't. That idea kind of reminded me a bit of the Candle Cove and the Skin Taker. Good stuff. I think I read that in our last one we did. Another sip for me. Surprisingly, we're only not even an hour in. This may end up being a short one tonight. Let me check. Ooh, this is a damn, you picked a long one. But it is covered, so let's see. I hope this is good. Let's check real quick. Loved it. Awesome job. Okay. Cool. We will use this one then. Just so you guys know, I might have to take a break in the middle to get some sip if I'm trying to do this in all Irish. Alright. A little bit of extra sip before we start. No, this one is much longer. We'll go with that. Okay, so it's not perfect, but there it is. This one that Eggs picked out for us. And Eggs desires this one to be in Irish, so we'll hope for the best. The cabin in the woods had been abandoned for years. Oh, wait, hold on. Cabin Fervor by Tewawe. The cabin in the woods had been abandoned for years, but one night a candle burned on the window. In the dead of night, it served as a beacon for the desperate father and daughter. Lost and terrified, a malevolent creature pursued them. The dancing flame tickled the candle's wick, its light magnified by the shiny tin dish on which it stood. The fragmented family burst through the old yet sturdy door and fell to their knees. As the terrified little girl began to beg her father for answers, he hushed her with 2 fingers over her lips. He knew that whatever pursued them was still out there, still hunting. Just as the thought of dousing the candle entered the father's mind, it snuffed itself out, as though the cabin knew. Through the pale moonlight that pierced the window opposite them, They could see the meager furnishings of the cabin. There was a single chair under a dusty painting and a spongy off-white cot. After what felt like an eternity of sitting in silence and darkness, the man believed that whatever was pursuing them had given up. He stood, took his daughter's hand, and led her to the cot. As she lay down, he hung a lullaby to soothe her fears. Lay down, sweet Lily, lay on the river's bed. When you sit up and rise again, the sun will kiss your head. Haggard and tired, the man made his way over to the chair. A strange sense of serenity overcame him as he leaned back into its soft cushions. It was as though the chair was made of him. It was as though the chair was made for him. Lily lay sleeplessly on the dingy cot, too scared to sleep. She went to her father for comfort, but found that he had drifted off. As the sunlight pierced the scraggly, bleak, and bare tree line, Lily hurriedly ran to her father's side.
Daddy, Daddy, wake up. It's light out. Can we go look for Mommy? Can we go home?
As he was roused to consciousness, the man looked to the patch of sunlight on the floor. Straining against the overwhelming exhaustion he felt, he peeled himself from the seat. He gazed out the window for many minutes, barely able to brace himself upright on the sill. "Let me rest a short while longer," he said, preparing himself to lie. "We'll search for your mother when I regain my strength." Deep down he knew that his beautiful wife was gone. His daughter had not seen what became of her, hadn't seen what he had. The mental image of her losing her footing before whatever hunted them descended upon her overcame him. And yet, as he sat back down in the plushy embrace of the chair, he felt strangely at peace with his loss. Many hours passed as Lily's father slept deeply. Looking around the cabin, anxious and scared, the little girl's thoughts were disrupted by hunger. How long had it been since she had eaten? Suddenly a movement caught her eye. The painting over her sleeping father seemed to twitch. As she peered closer at it, she noticed that the painting was a small house, remarkably similar looking to the cabin. As she stared into the picture, it began to distort. The upper windows began to open slightly, and though they were eyes, as though they were eyes, prying themselves from slumber. The porch began to twist and curve into a grin.
Daddy, Daddy, wake up. The painting's moving.
The father fought hard to open his eyes, turned his head to face the painting. He saw nothing but a happy-looking house on a hill. "Sweetie, it's okay. It's your imagination. Just let me rest and please don't leave the cabin." For the next few hours, Lily sat against the wall opposite the painting. She stared hard into its sly and knowing smile, but it moved no more. She turned her attention away from the painting and saw the sun beginning to set. The curiosity she once held for the picture above her father became overshadowed by her fear. With the darkness growing, maybe the thing would come back. The sun had fully set, but the cabin was strangely illuminated. Turning toward the window, Lily noticed the flickering candle.
"Did I light that?"
she thought to herself. Could not have been her father, as he was still fast asleep. Then she heard it, the tapping at the window. She fought to ignore it, but its consistent pattern told her that it was not just a tree branch beckoned by the wind. As she approached the window, the young girl's heart skipped a beat. Lay outside, sweetie. The familiar. Oh, oops. It's supposed to be her mom. uh, we're gonna have to fix that one.
Come play outside, sweetie.
The familiar and gentle voice called from the darkness. The pristine and clear face of her mother stared back at her.
Daddy, Daddy, Mama's back,
she exclaimed as she raced to the door. Fighting a desperate battle for consciousness, the father locked eyes with the being outside the window. He knew it was not his wife, not the mother of his child. Something was playing with them, trying to lure his daughter. Don't go out. Not your mother, he managed to gasp out before falling back into the throes of slumber. Lily stopped after hearing her father's words. She stared at the latch on the door for a few moments before walking back to the window.
Come outside, honey. We'll go home together and eat supper,
the woman outside softly cooed. Lily stared at the woman. It was far too clean for someone who had spent so much time lost in the woods. Too calm for anyone who had been chased by a monster not one night prior.
You're not my mama,
Lily croaked. The pleasant smile of the woman outside began to dissolve, transforming into a sinister scowl. It looked as though her face was melting into a mixture of anger and desire. The woman slinked back into the darkness, disappearing into a thicket of trees. The little girl ran to her father's side, grasped his arm, and began to weep. The candle's flame extinguished itself once more. It's that moment where I need a little bit of sip. The girl snapped into consciousness many hours later, woken by the eerie feeling that she was being watched. It was still dark, almost pitch black in the cabin. She was surprised that she managed to fall asleep, but she was worn out and exhausted. In the subtle, illuminating flickers of the moonlight, seeping through the breaks in the clouds, and she could see the layout of the cabin. Feeling her way around, she reached where the door was, or where it should have been. It was as though the cabin had shifted its layout. As her heart sank, she desperately began to feel her way around the walls of the cabin, gradually increasing her pace.
Daddy, Dad.
Her calls were cut short as she bumped into something soft and spongy. The familiar scent of copper and dirt filled her nostrils. She fell to the floor, desperately trying to see what it was. Her eyes scanned the cabin through the darkness. As clouds cleared and moonlight bathed the room, she saw the outline of a dingy off-white humanoid figure. Irritably, it dashed across the room, the metal on metal of the latch clapping open and the door swinging ajar could be heard as the gangly creature scampered off into the night. A chill filled the cabin. The young girl scrambled to her feet and slammed the door shut. She fell to her knees where the soft cot once stood, began to crawl about the room, feeling around for her father, or the chair that seemed to have become his prison. Eventually, she found it and curled up desperately next to his legs, terrified and alone. After a time she couldn't imagine, she stood and guided herself to the window. The thought of the candle's flame somehow made her feel less isolated, less alone. Her father was little more than the furniture now, melded into the chair. This is the worst song for this moment. On the sill, next to the tin dish that held the candle, she felt a small box of matches. She struck one into a flame and raised her gaze to the candle in the window before screaming and dropping the match. Suddenly, the candle had burst into flame, revealing what had startled her. Once again, her mother's face leered obsessively through the glass.
I miss you,
The face lovingly hissed.
Daddy, Daddy.
Lily cried. She turned her face. She turned to face him in the flickering light of the candle. His eyes were wide open, staring in horror at the window. She ran to him and held him. The voice sang from the window.
Come out, sweet Lily. Lay on the forest floor. The bad dreams that you've had so far will bother you no more.
Lily, tears in her eyes, stood in front of the window. The candle gave her a sense that there was a buffer between her and whoever or whatever the creature out there was.
Please leave us alone. You're not my mama. I want to go home.
The woman gave Lily a somber gaze.
Why are you doing this to your mother? I'm trying to help you. That man in there is not your father.
Lily froze. She turned around to meet her father's gaze. The only indication he was conscious, let alone alive, were his wide, fearful eyes. She walked over to him and laid her hand on top of his. Desperately, she tried to lift it, to hold it, but she couldn't pry it from the armrest. She stared down to see the stitching of the chair had begun to weave itself into her father's flesh. Slowly, he and the chair were becoming one. As she looked upon her entombed former guardian with tears in her eyes, the candle flickered and squelched itself back into darkness. Fervently, she worked to release her father. In the hollow white light of the moon, Lily found it difficult to see what she was doing. She removed her hairpin and tried to use it to pick at the threads that fastened him to the chair. Just as she thought she was making progress, she realized the area she had previously pried free had an even thicker layer of fabric than before. She began to weep. How long she had been trying to free him. How long ago did this start? She had no idea. She stood for a few moments, pin in one hand, clump of thick, leathery fabric in the other, tears streaming down her face. She'd begun to forget what it was like to not be living in fear, to not be struggling alone. She so desperately needed someone to hold her. At that moment, the candle's wick immolated itself once more. A new horror crept over Lily as she saw the results of her efforts to free her father. A large strip of skin had been torn from the underside of his forearm. Lily looked at his eyes. They were tightly closed, but tears leaked from them. She turned the patch of fabric, seeing the chunk of flesh in the dancing candlelight. She grew sick, and a familiar voice called from the window.
Hold me, sweet Lily. Give me a hug so tight. All your fears and woes be gone. I'll guard you through the night.
was a familiar voice, but not that of her mother. A desperate sense of hope filled her heart. She turned her gaze to the window. Two faces peered back at her, her mother's and her father's. Please come outside, my dear. That man is not your father, the thing wearing her father's face said. She looked back at the man in the chair and didn't look sleepy anymore. In fact, for the first time since he sat in that chair, he looked truly alert. He was struggling, feebly, pathetically thrashing as much as his bondage would allow. He attempted to speak, but it was muffled as his mouth was stitched shut. He desperately tried to warn Lily. Why did the creature abandon its chase once we arrived here? He thought. Was it trying to lead us here all along? A dark clarity consumed his mind as he realized the cabin they believed to be their salvation may very well be their doom.
If I go outside, will we go home?
Lily said, feeling the first true hope she'd had since they first encountered whatever was out there.
We'll take you home, sweetie,
the two said in unison. Lily slowly walked over to the door, placed her hand on the latch. The man in the chair thrashed ever harder. His moans and wails grew louder. She looked back at the sobbing man who wailed pitifully through his bound mouth.
I'm not sure if you're my papa,
she muttered softly to the man in the chair as she opened the door and stepped outside. Tears streamed down Lily's father's face as he looked past the candle in the window. He watched his daughter walking into the woods with a figure on either side of her. Figures looked horrendous, misshapen, inhuman. He attempted to cry out in vain as he felt new stitching pull his eyelids shut. The last thing he saw was his daughter crossing into the darkness as the candle flickered out once more. Come back, sweet Lily. Your life is on the line. The creatures that led you astray will surely on you dine. Alright, so between the creepypastas, we're going to stop the music just so I can, start it up when we start a new one. But Eggs, how did you like the one you picked? In Irish, no less. I hope you enjoyed it. You loved your choice. I hope everybody enjoyed my accent. And couple times we had a little trouble. Some of those words were not ones I'm familiar with. All right. So, save that one there so I can link it later. If anybody in the audience would like to say anything at this moment, feel free. These brief intermissions, of which we all need to get a little bit of sip, is the perfect time to comment, to say hello, whatever you like. And we have only been going for an hour and 14 minutes. I have done 4 stories so far. Hi, Moon. Moon, I'm going to actually give you this option too, since, it all depends on how long we can go before my voice gives out from constant reading, but hopefully eventually I'll be hydrated enough to be able to go on for a while. But, Moon, I'm DMing you something so you can pick a story. It has to have that label at the bottom, though. I hope you are doing well, Moon, and I hope everyone out there watching is doing well. Thank you so much for tuning in this evening. All right. So, we are going to do one called White Christmas. Now, again, these are ones that I haven't actually read myself yet. Just ones that I found that are, within guidelines regarding what is or is not for use. Let's see. I wish so much that if I am able to do these later on, somehow get some music creating software. I might have to make my own creepy version of music for this. All right. So I have to check and make sure, of course, that these are. That is not. I hate it when they do this. No copyright. Free download. Dark Christmas music. Okay, cool. At least this one is not copywritten. Let me jump through these real quick. No copyright. Copyright free. We can't do that one. I love Miyu's music, but oh hey, wait, hold on. Miyu says it's free. Oh, we might have to use Miyu's music when I do these later on, because he says it's free use as long as he gets credits. So, all right. So, as I said, this next one is called White Christmas. It's by Locked334. Living in Lower Alabama, we rarely receive snow. I spent most of my life wishing for a white Christmas, and a white Christmas that never came. I've only seen snow twice in my 33 years here, and I always wanted to share that with my two boys. Just knew that they would love to play in it. Wow, that took a while. This is supposed to be creepy. What? Alright, we're gonna jump over to Miyu. Anyway, let me restart that actually. Living in Lower Alabama, we rarely receive snow. I spent most of my life wishing for a white Christmas, a white Christmas that never came. I have only seen snow twice in my 33 years of here. I always wanted to share that with my boys. I just knew that they would love to play in it. Now I find myself staring out my window at the mounds of that icy precipitation surrounding my home, regretting ever wishing I had ever made for regretting every wish I had ever made for a snow-covered Christmas. When I think about it, it really started in summer. Our summers are always hot and extremely humid, but that year it was even more unbearable. We steadily saw temperatures of well over 100 degrees, and everyone I knew begged for relief. The heat wave lasted all the way up until the week before Halloween, and suddenly a massive hurricane spawned in the Gulf of Mexico. The weather forecaster for our local news frequently referred to it as a monster. Looking back, I would believe it was more of a demon that brought hell with it, but a much different one than I had read about in the Bible. Uh-huh. The storm passed, leaving devastation for miles around. It had affected every state within the southeast, but Florida most of all. Help was sent from various utility companies, government aid agencies, and even regular citizens to help with the relief. When I say various, I mean from every state in our region. It was amazing to see the effort put forth to help. It was amazing to see the effort put forth to help the people that had lost everything. I'm sure a lot of us thought that was the worst it could get. I wish that had been true. But that was when the rain started. As November came, we felt the first droplets in our tiny town. It was an odd occurrence, but not odd enough to raise anyone's eyebrows. I mean, how bad could a couple of days of rain be, right? The problem came when days turned into weeks and low-lying areas became flooded. And also when commercials happened. Homes and towns nearby were washed away in a matter of hours among trees. Homes and towns were washed away in a matter of hours once the levees broke. My wife Susan constantly thanked God that our house was nestled on a high elevation among trees. Found myself thinking Found myself thinking the same thing, but God had nothing to do with what happened. No God I could ever believe in anyway. The week of Thanksgiving, the rain finally subsided, and I'm sure that was something everyone would say they were thankful for. Problem was, what remained was the cold. That in itself was not strange, but the severity of it was. We saw temperatures close to freezing for the following week. And that was something we rarely saw until late January or early February. My oldest son, Jacob, began singing that silly song by Bing Crosby. My wife beamed at the thought of them seeing snow on Christmas Day. The foolish child in me felt the same.
The boys will finally get to see snow, Paul,
Susan squealed. I know. I can't wait to see Tommy waddling in it, I responded. Those words ring in my head even now. I have to fight back tears when I think of just how stupid I had been. We were so preoccupied with setting up decorations and buying presents that we were oblivious to what was happening all around us. The snow actually started falling the first week of December. It was up several inches within the first day. It was amazing to see at first, but when it kept coming, some people became worried. If you have ever been in the South when it snows, you probably would not understand. You see, we are not prepared for that kind of weather. Everything shuts down. People stay home and rarely go out driving. I know it sounds ridiculous to anyone else, but that is what happens. It just kept coming. My wife and I had let the boys play in the fresh powder originally, but when it had gotten so high that I could barely walk in it freely, we decided it was best to keep them indoors. Hardware stores had started bringing in snow shovels to help clear paths, something that you rarely found in our town. I bought one of I bought one of the last ones on the shelf as people scrambled to manage the icy foreign invader. The situation seemed to become worse as small flurries became near blizzards. My wife stayed glued to the news and weather broadcasts. And okay. My wife stayed glued to the news and weather broadcasts. It appeared the northern states had almost been buried in the frigid powder. The president had actually issued a state of emergency urging people in the northern portion to evacuate south. That was when I finally started to be concerned. These people had been told to come south, but our situation was hardly any better. The weatherman stopped trying to be accurate, and his predictions of an end to the madness never came. The temperatures continued to drop, and it was not long before we saw them go from 0 to negative digits. It was unheard of in my state for it to be that cold, and people were getting afraid. Plumbing fixtures began to burst from frozen pipes, and people were left without water until they could thaw. Our world had become a freezer in a few weeks, and none of us were prepared for it. My family found themselves wearing our thickest clothing even inside. It felt like no matter how high I set the thermostat, it was not enough. We should have left then. Quick sip. By Christmas, we had no power, and utility companies had stopped trying to traverse the harsh conditions to repair downed lines. Local officials had abandoned emergency protocols to save themselves. We began hearing rumors of our neighbors attempting to head further south into Florida. Susan suggested the same, but I reminded her that of the destruction still left from the hurricane. I was afraid we would be worse off without shelter. So I made the decision to hunker down in our home. I cleared a path to the fireplace that had only been used for decoration and set to the task of getting a fire going. If it was not such a dire situation, my wife would have found amusement in me attempting something like that. I'd never even seen someone use a fireplace, let alone lit one. After several attempts, we were able to burn what little wood that was readily available near our home. My family and I huddled around it as if it were going to save us from the fate that waited outside. The whiteness had engulfed our home. Mounds had risen above the windows, breaking some of them. I was forced to reinforce each one to keep the cold out. We sealed every crack or crevice that could possibly let out that heat and tried to remain together. My wife wrapped our children in blankets and pulled them close. The boys did not understand, and we were afraid to tell them how serious the situation was. The fear that rested on my wife's face was enough to keep me from ruining what could be our last Christmas. We still attempted to have a big dinner, despite our ability to effectively cook. I also learned how to cook within a fireplace for the first time. It would have been an interesting experiment if it had not been essential for our survival at the time. We gave up on the idea of a turkey or ham, but we had always had a decent stock of canned goods. It was a habit I had picked up from my grandparents. I often wondered how they were faring during all of this, but I had my immediate family to worry about. Our world had been plunged into an endless sea of white. I even had nightmares of the stuff that Christmas Eve. Now, my children normally woke me early on Christmas morning, but when my eyes fluttered open, I assumed it was still night. The house was so dark that I could barely see my wife lying next to me. I slowly rose from my bed, still completely clothed, and nudged Susan awake. The house had become far colder than it should have been. I immediately headed to the fireplace. Fire had gone out at some point, so I ran for the back door, pulling on my boots. My aim was to gather more wood to get the fire going again, but as soon as the door cracked open, I was pelted with a mixture of snow and ice. It stung my face, and I cursed at the door while trying to shut it again. Our home had been buried in the vicious powder, and I finally understood why no light permeated the windows. My watch read 9 o'clock, but it felt much earlier. Susan stumbled into the living room, asking what I was doing. I told her what time it was, and confusion filled her eyes. She went for the window and was greeted with what I already knew. I don't I do not remember ever seeing her quite so afraid, and the feeling was mutual. Buried my emotions down, though, knowing I had to be strong for my family. I told her to go check on the kids while I tried to get the fire going again. She disappeared down the hall and I made my way to the dining room. Table and chairs had been passed down through my family for generations, but I knew it would have to be sacrificed. I set to dismantling the wooden chairs first, but was stopped by the sound of my wife's scream. I rushed through the hall, listening to the awful sound echo in my ears. I could feel tears forming in my eyes, but I pushed them back as I rounded the corner. And gave a quick minute for a commercial break. There we go. She was grasping the doorframe of our children's room. We had put them together so that Jacob could help keep an eye on Tommy. I could see her body shaking as she stared into the room. Tears rolled over her cheeks as I turned to see them. Tears rolled over her cheeks as I turned to see inside. The window of their room had given to the weight of our captor. Despite my attempt at strengthening it, snow had buried the boys in the night, and that was when I noticed the flakes of white all over my wife's hands. Susan had attempted to uncover them, and I could see the pale blue skin of their faces huddled together in Jacob's bed. Might have to give up on the music. It's a little too fanciful for this moment. It would have been a sweet scene if it were not for their skin tone. Something Susan would have taken a picture of, but this was not that scene. I pulled Susan away as I tried to hold back the sick. I pulled Susan away as I tried to hold back the sick feeling in my stomach. I felt as though I could release what little Christmas dinner I had in me on the floor at any moment. Soon her sobs subsided, but when I looked into her eyes, she simply looked numb. I'd never seen her this way, and I tried to break her from this trance she seemed to be in, but she said nothing. Her eyes would not even turn my direction when I spoke. Something had broken inside Susan that morning, and I don't blame her. I sat her next to the fireplace and wrapped her in a blanket while I returned to the dining room. The polished wood did not want to burn, but I was determined to give us warmth. so I did not stop until we had fire. I made it a point to ask Susan to stay by the fire while I returned to the boys' room. I could not leave them that way, but when I reached the door, I found myself pausing just outside. I felt the warm and salty specks across my cheeks before I even saw them. I slowly stepped inside and slid gloves over my hands. I finished clearing away the snow and noticed why they had not simply come to our room. The wood I had used to seal off the window had struck my oldest first, left a gash near his temple that would have knocked a grown man unconscious. I could only imagine his 10-year-old body had not lasted long after. Tommy had obviously woken after. His tiny form clung to his big brother like a teddy bear. I internally cursed myself for not putting them to bed with us that night, but I knew it was too late for that kind of thinking. I removed their bodies and wrapped them in blankets before placing them in the guest room. Took one final look at their tiny bedroom, a place that had held so much joy previously. I imagined the two of them playing and sometimes bickering. My lips tried to curl upward, but they could not. My eyes dropped to the floor as I turned away and shut the door. I've not returned to that room since, and I doubt I will. I just returned to the living room in hopes of comforting Susan, but when I got there, the blanket was all that remained by the fire. A quick search of the house revealed that the back door had been opened and a tunnel had formed in the frigid wall on the other side, leaving the floor inside covered in snow. I tried to follow Susan's footsteps, but eventually they disappeared behind a solid wall of that cursed white. I could only imagine her frantically digging through it and the sound of what was above coming down upon her. I tried to dig into it myself in search of her body, but the layer that remained the layer that remained was frozen solid. It was like digging my hands into cement, and I knew that Susan could not have survived it. Even if my mind did not want to believe it at the time, I found myself picking at it with tools anyway, feeling as though I had nothing left to do. I do not know how much I cried while working at this pointless task, but I do know it started to freeze my cheeks. It did not stop until my arms could not lift again, and that is when I sat among the snow and stared at what my world had become. I lost track of how long I sat there or when I decided to come back to the fire. I do remember when I started burning the Christmas gifts and how hard a choice that had been. I opened each one slowly and savored the idea of the children playing with it for the first time. I could even see Susan standing over them with her camera in hand. She would be giving her biggest smile and snapping away to save each memory. She loved taking pictures, but what I had to do did not need to be captured on any sort of film. I started to feel the numbness that night, that same numbness that overtook Susan earlier that day. It was as cold as the snow that surrounded me, and all I could think was this had been my fault. Should have escaped with my family when I still had the chance. I did not know if it was pride, ignorance, or both, but the guilt was too much. It consumed me and took away everything this holiday was supposed to be about. Started writing this in hopes that someone reads it. I don't know what has happened to the rest of the world, only what has happened to me. I do not know how long I can survive here. My food is running low and run out of things to burn. I cannot even say for certain how long I've been here since, My watch has stopped turning and I still can't see the sun. I think I'll try to dig myself out tomorrow, and if you do find this, know I did not simply give up. I just wish I had done this sooner. I'm so sorry, Susan, Jacob, Tommy. You deserve better than this. I hope you can forgive me. Sincerely, Paul Richardson. Well, hey, thank you, Giga. Welcome, and thank you for the lurk. I hope your Christmas went well. Okay, let's click this. Oh, wow. Okay, Moon, that sounds horrifying. Come over here and edit this guy. Let's go to the bottom, make sure everything's good. It is good. Sorry, guys, that one went a little long and the music had to be ousted. Like I said, once I get better at video editing, hopefully we'll be able to just make some videos and get some actual practice before I read them. So I can have a bit better inflection. All right, so for this one, let's see. That's going to be amazingly large. There we go. We'll put that there so it won't cover my face. All right, well, with that long story out of the way, everybody get your sip. It is time. It is needed, especially for me. I wish I had more, but we are low. Might have to get up and get some here in a minute. All right, so Moon chose this one. This one is called Black Eyed Children at Christmas by Austin D.R. Miss Delphine Smithers was an 83-year-old woman who lived by herself save for her cat. Her husband had passed 2 years prior, and her children have since grown up and left the nest. But come Christmas time, and Miss Smithers gets her joy whenever her grandchildren paid a visit. She thought of the looks on their faces whenever she served them Christmas cookies and other pleasantries. This Christmas she made some sweet and salty bark and kept it on the kitchen table. She found herself sitting down in her favorite chair, knitting a scarf when there came a sharp knock at the door. She jumped a bit, not expecting any visitors at the moment.
Can we come in?
Smithers tentatively laid the scarf on the arm of the sofa and gripped the chair. Her frail bones popped and shifted. Getting up from the chair, Smithers collected her walking stick and trudged rigidly towards the front door. Another sharp knock rung out, that time more agitated than previously.
I'm coming. Hold on,
Smithers yelled. She grasped the doorknob and turned it counterclockwise. The door creaked open. On the other end of the door were two children, a boy and a girl. The boy appeared older, presumably around 13. He wore a denim hoodie and gray pants. He was holding the hand of an 8-year-old girl who was wearing a blue dress with white lace. For whatever reason, the children had their heads bowed, looking at their feet. The boy repeated his question.
Can we come in?
Smithers scratched her head. It was 10 p.m. Why would these children be at her house at that time of night? Somehow the boy must have realized what she was thinking.
We need to borrow your phone. My cell phone battery's dead.
Smithers thought more about the suddenness of having these unexpected guests. But they were children regardless. At the very least, she could grant them this one request. She nodded her head, gesturing the two children in. Smithers directed them into the living room where her cat droned awake from the ruckus. When it set its eyes on the two mysterious children, the cat arched its back and hissed. Smithers walked over to silence her cat.
Oh, Lex, these are our guests. Behave yourself.
The cat mewed in defeat before running out of the living room and into the kitchen. The two children sat on the sofa, their eyes still hidden. Smithers went into the kitchen and pulled out the plate of sweet and salty bark. She returned to the living room and bent down to the children's eye level.
Care for some sweets?
The boy looked up. There was a good reason as to why he was shielding his eyes. They were devoid of color or pupils. Nothing more than pitch black nothingness. Whatever he assuredly was not of the earthly realm. The girl looked up as well. Her eyes matched the coal blackness of the older boy. And yet, most bizarre, Smithers smiled at the children despite the hollow sockets that they call eyes. The children were speechless at first. They shared a puzzled glare. The girl waved her hand in front of Smithers's the girl waved her hand in front of Smithers's face, but Smithers didn't follow the path of it. They leaned in closer, realizing that Smithers's eyes were glazed over in a thin sheet of blue. She was blind. Smithers suddenly frowned.
Oh, I'm sorry. You don't care for them?
Thank you, the boy said. He took a piece of sweet and salty bark and broke it in his hand before passing the girl a piece. Their heavy teeth ground down on the sweets. Oddness aside, the two children couldn't help but bask in the sweetness and saltiness of the snack. They indulged themselves in more of the sweets before getting up. They looked at the decorations with curiosity. On top of the fireplace on a stand was a small replica of the nativity scene. From her mental notes, she figured that the two children had stopped at the fireplace.
Isn't it such a lovely display?
She asked.
Do you know the story of Christmas?
We know about your Jesus, the boy responded.
Our ancestors spoke a lot about him.
Confused by his statement, Smithers nevertheless allowed the two children to further marvel at the Christmas decorations. The girl rustled the Christmas tree, causing the ornaments to fall on the ground. She ceased when she sensed Smithers getting upset. The two children played with the nutcrackers and listened to the Christmas songs. The hours edged by slowly until a sudden electrical surge generated through the house. The two children looked at each other and back at Smithers.
We have to go now. Our parents are here.
Bright light shone through the windows. Outside was a spherical, smooth craft standing on three legs. A large, skinny-looking creature exited the craft and stood there at the door. The two children collected the plate of sweet and salty bark and exited through the front door. There came a sound of a large whistle as if there were 1,000 steam engines situated outside. Within a flash, the craft was gone. Smithers called out for the two children, only to be met by a great silence. She closed the door and returned to her knitting. Well, I have to say, I was not expecting that. Given the given the general theme that it seems that I have found of stories tonight thus far, I was more expecting them to be demon children than alien children. But the only thing I can guess is these were like, you know, essentially grays dressed up with their black sunken eyes. All right, so I said I would do it. We're gonna do it real quick. I'm gonna give you guys a little more music while I go fill up the sip. Unfortunately, it will require me to actually find it first. Right. That should take long enough. I want to say, well, I will ask for forgiveness later in the event that he doesn't want this particular one shared without permission. Uh, I'm gonna put it in the chat real quick just to be safe. It is Miyu, Myuu. The guy does some pretty good music. Anyway, I will be right back. Hello, I have returned. Might have to do his dark version of Jingle Bells here in a minute. It's very good. It's always funny when it first picks me up again and I go from like too. Shockingly. All right. So we are 2 hours in. Let's see. We have a boatload of Christmas ones. We have at least two Christmas ones. Um, this one is super long. I'm gonna save that for another day. What is this? Yes, thank you. All right, that one doesn't fall under it either. So, unless anybody has any requests as far as, um, end of the year, Yule time, New Year's, whatever type related creepypastas, or just something amazingly, you know, something that's their amazing favorite, that does fall under CCBYSA, which is something that I guess the Creepypasta Wiki website uses for licensing. We have 3 remaining. So I'm going to start with this one. This one is called Christmas, simply. It is by Cafe Legendary. I could never sleep well in hotels. I guess that's somewhat of an understatement. I could never sleep well in general, but hotels were the worst. Just the thought of that, just the thought that the previous occupant of this bed is a complete stranger was repulsive in my mind. But that's beside the point. What I'm getting at is how this lack of sleep in hotels changed my life. Christmas, we were spending Christmas in a shitty hotel and now with my family. Great. Don't get me wrong. It's not like I didn't enjoy the all you can eat buffet of soggy hash browns and grits for Christmas Eve dinner. Of course, the first snow of the season had to cancel our flight down to Virginia. It was Christmas Eve, and I was trying to sleep in this bleach saturated room. My mind was wondering what happened in here to cause such an excessive amount of bleach to be needed. The room was nothing out of the ordinary. 2 beds, for my dad and one for me, and another. Sorry. The room was nothing out of the ordinary. 2 beds, one for my dad and I, and another for my sister and mom. A bathroom and a stained microwave that looked in need of a good dusting. Somehow I escaped the room and stench of bleach into a dreamless sleep. Waking up, I couldn't tell if. Waking up, I could tell it was early morning. My dad was next to me snoring and usually wakes up before 4 a.m. That's when it hit me. It's Christmas. I was about to let this bad fortune ruin my favorite holiday. Looking across the Looking across the bed at the clock to check the time is when I noticed it. The silhouette of a man about 6'3" across the room staring at my mom sleeping. Still half asleep, caught up in the moment, I couldn't help thinking of Santa Claus. Realized how stupid the thought was, and horror soon filled my head. I choked back a shriek. I knew I couldn't let him see me awake, so I quietly put my head back down, pretending to sleep. My mind was racing. Someone was in my room, and I couldn't do anything. I was a scrawny 16-year-old man, looked built like an ox. Wondered if I could wake my dad up in time, but I knew that wouldn't work. He slept like a rock. A bucket of water couldn't get him up fast enough. was practically in tears. I had never felt so helpless. For a second time, I choked back a scream. He was standing next to me and could feel and hear his repulsive breath on my face. Smelled like he'd been eating rotten meat for a week, now with no thought to brush his teeth. If he didn't know I was awake, surely he did now, seeing my face was contorted in fear. The breathing stopped, and I couldn't help a sigh of relief. I would have kicked myself, but there was no need. I heard the room door open and close. I launched out of bed. Nothing in the room was in disarray, and my family was still asleep. It couldn't have been a dream. Couldn't have imagined it. Feeling awake as ever, a horrible idea popped into my head. Before I could push it away, I was pulling the door open. Glancing back to the door in order to memorize the room number, I saw the giant spray painted black X on the door. Had I seen this without the prior experience? I probably wouldn't have thought it was just some. I probably would have thought it was just some stupid kids. I knew better, but not enough to know what it was for. My heart skipped a beat, and there he was, turning the corner at the end of the hall. Why am I doing this? I tailed him down to the parking lot. He was nowhere in sight. One moment he was walking up the lobby, next he's gone. Realizing how cold it is outside in paper thin pajamas, I returned to the lobby. No one was around. Strange. I could swear there's usually a night concierge. Adrenaline wearing off, I realized how stupid and rash my actions had been. He could have killed me. I cursed myself back up the stairs. I knew something was wrong when I got to my floor. The door to my room was wide open. I hadn't left it that way, right? I walked inside, and after a quick search of the room, I determined it was safe. My family was still asleep. I locked the door and got back into bed, though I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I listened to my dad get up, and eventually my mom followed, but still pretended to sleep. A few hours passed, and my parents got my sister and I up. We got into the car and made our way back to the airport. Digging through my bag to grab my iPod led to finding something that hadn't been in there previous day. A note that simply held the 5 words I still think about to this day. I knew you were awake. It's now been 2 months since the hotel experience, and I'm still scared for my life, and it gets worse every day. That note I found wasn't the only one. I still receive them. Ooh, that's that's certainly creepy. Let's remove that one. And sorry for the pauses, everybody. I get a little. I'm constantly a little dehydrated, even given my diet. So I need to get more into the sip myself, especially before we do readings like this. I will do my best to improve in the future, but thank you again, everyone, for hanging out while we read. Let's see. Take a quick second here. Seeing if somebody else wants to pick one for us. Okay. Let me get my own sip real quick, as it is that time. Oh, did I? Hmm, pretty sure I did. Um, all right, so that's the right one? Yes. Our next one. The next story on the list is entitled Christmas Day. Christmas Day is a creepypasta written by Nowhere Man 0828. Doing a little stuff over here. All right. My eyes shot open, reflexively tightened up, and looked towards the door. It's 12:01 a.m., Christmas morning, and at any moment the door to the bedroom will burst open and my two beautiful children will run in giggling with presents already in hand. Seconds passed and nothing happened. Took a full minute before I remembered no one would be coming through the door this year. Kid's accident was only a couple months ago. I wake up most mornings, and for the briefest moment every day, I forget that they're gone. I find myself lying in bed, listening for their laughter or cries for breakfast to fill the house, before the pain of losing them hits me as fresh as the day it happened. It was a car accident that took them away. I was supposed to pick them up after school, but work ran late. Called my daughter Samantha, who was 13, 3 years older than her brother Ryan was, and told her they would have to walk home. It was only a couple of blocks, and they had done it plenty of times before. It was not a big deal, except that day it would be. She was only a kid, around the age of 25. She did not see them crossing the street. She was probably texting, eating, or doing one of the 100 other things people do while driving other than paying attention. It did not matter what she was doing. She hit both of them, and they didn't make it. Ryan died right there on the road while the ambulance tried to bring Samantha to the hospital in time to save her life. They were not fast enough, and in the span of 20 minutes, my life was destroyed. Janet, my wife at the time, blamed me. Of course she did. I mean, it would not have happened if I had just picked them up as I was supposed to. She made it through the funeral and burials before leaving, and thinking back on it, I could not blame her. Can't stand the sight of myself either. That's why all the mirrors in the house are shattered. Why the gun I bought last week was already loaded and waiting in the nightstand by the empty bed. Okay, warning everyone, this is getting exceedingly dark. In the event of self deletion, please do not take it to heart. All of these thoughts rushed through my head as I dragged myself out of bed and put my head in my hands. It is the first Christmas have had to spend alone. The house dark and empty. Last year at this time the kids were awake and already opening one special present they picked out to start Christmas with. The tree would be lit, casting a festive glow in the living room, and the smell of cocoa and coffee would be strong in the air. But it was the laughter and joy that would wake me up the most. As a parent, there is nothing better than seeing your kids excited and happy, and nothing does that more than opening presents on Christmas Day. I closed my eyes and tried to collect my thoughts, but sound from the living room grabbed my attention. It sounded like the soft thud of little feet trying to be quiet as they snuck through the house. A sound I've not heard in months. Shuffling off the bed, I made my way towards the sound, opening the door to the bedroom and looking out to the empty living room. This is where they would be sitting, right under the tree, presents in hand, waiting for a sign they could start ripping into their presents. Of course, no one is there now. The room was dark and the fake tree was still in its box, propped up against the wall and unopened. It hurt too much to try to get ready for Christmas without them, and it hurt too much to try. Looking at the empty living room, I could almost feel them there, sitting legs crossed, looking towards our room, waiting to see if we were ready. They would each get to open their one present and then get whatever was in their stockings. Mostly little dollar store trinkets and candy. But it was still exciting to them to even but it was still exciting to them even though they were getting too old for the cheap toys. It was never going to be that way again. This holiday of love and joy for everyone else will be a constant reminder of what I lost. Made worse by the fact all other families, neighbors, and even strangers are coming together, putting aside their differences and the problems to have this one special day together. And here I am alone. The weight of the gun in my hand snaps me back to the cold, dark room that is my life now, reminding me there is still a way out. I look toward the tree and imagine it like it was last year, blue and silver twine circling the bright blue LCD lights. Superhero and Disney character ornaments from theme parks and rest stops the kids always had to have. Decadent glass orbs that were a wedding gift, and two angels looking back at me, smiling and waiting for me to join them. I'm coming, I thought as I felt the cold metal of the gun barrel against the as I felt the cold metal gun barrel against my temple. I pulled the trigger. The sound is louder than anything I ever experienced, and I heard it a fraction before the pain hit. So loud, I could not see. The world went black as all my senses faded until all I could experience was the roar between my ears. When the pain finally came, it was almost a relief. The sound did not stop, but my focus shifted from an earth shattering rumbling to a drill like sensation that started in my temple and bored inward. A combination of the sound and pain dropped me to my knees, gun slipping from my hand. Reflexively, my hands shot up to the source of the pain and found nothing. Not a mark at the spot just seconds ago I shot a bullet.
Can we open our presents now, Daddy?
A voice cut through the pain, and I struggled to open my eyes to find the source. The dark, empty room I was in moments ago was transformed when my eyes finally pried open. The first thing I noticed was everything is bathed in a red flickering light. The glow coming from the back wall where the unopened Christmas tree box used to sit. Now in its place was a fully decorated tree. Instead of blue and silver of years past, the tree was dressed in red tinsel and lights that contained actual flickering flames that gave the appearance of the tree being consumed by fire. Blood red ornaments seemed to drip the light throughout the tree and reflected the glow around the room. Sitting on the floor in front of me, presents in hand, were my children. Their matching green Christmas pajamas tinged red from the glowing tree, making them look muddy and unclean. Their backs were to me, but from where I was standing, I could see something was not right. Ryan's small arm was bent unnaturally at the elbow, giving it an insect like appearance, and the hand that rested on his present was twitching uncontrollably. Fingers tapping on the wrapping paper of the present at first seemed like he was merely trying to open it, but the more I watched, I could tell it was an involuntary spasm of pain. The floor under Samantha's crossed legs was covered in blood. I could not tell if it was coming from her or the present in her lap. Maybe both? Her head turned toward me. When I could just about see her face, her head flopped back on a clear, unbroken neck. Empty jet black eyes looked directly at me. A thin red trail of blood escaped her mouth, traveled upwards to her face, and started to pool in the corner of her right eye.
Can we open our presents now, Daddy?
She asked again, her voice deeper than I remembered, with none of the joy or light she had when she was alive. I had to get out of the house. The pain in my head is unbearable and diluting my equilibrium, but I managed to stumble out the front door. Outside was almost pitch black. All the lights on the street and neighboring buildings were off. The only source of light was coming from a full blood moon casting an odd dark orange hue over everything in sight. A loud, wet sounding thud caught my attention down the road, and I slowly make my way to a loud, wet sounding thud caught my attention down the road and slowly make my way to the apartment building down the street. Pain comes in waves, pressure building up in my skull, blinding me. Oh, it got so bad I fell to my knees again. There was not anything around that could help. The street was empty. The businesses and houses along the road were boarded up and looked abandoned. Nothing looked like it did yesterday. Once I was finally able to get moving, I saw a light on in a living room a couple houses down on the right of where I fell. I walked toward the light and I could see a figure standing at the window looking out towards the road in my direction. It was a woman, pale white skin, wearing a white wedding dress. As I got close, she raised her hand as if waving to me. I saw the marks on her arm. There was a long 4-inch slit starting from her palm where it met her wrist down to her mid forearm. Blood slowly pumped out in thick rivulets down her arm onto her white dress, staining it instantly. The pain flared up again, and I stumbled in front of the window. She looked down at me almost understandingly before she turned and disappeared into her house. We could not help each other, but just as she seemed to understand what I was now doing, just as she seemed to understand what I was now going through, I felt I understood her loss as well. It was this day, Christmas Day. For most, it was a reminder of what they had, but for us, it was too much of a reminder of what was lost. I collected myself for a moment before another loud, wet thud brought me back. I pushed onward, trying to find a way out of this nightmare. The street's Christmas decorations were still up, but the lights were all dead. The joyful colors of the forest green wreaths and red candy canes looked dull and corroded on the seemingly abandoned buildings. Ripped and haphazardly hung tinsel clung in it. Ripped and haphazardly hung tinsel clung in patches to the dark streetlights. Movement above me caught my attention. Hanging from the streetlight, almost hidden by moss-colored tinsel, was a slightly overweight man. He appeared to have been dead for some time, his dark features made even more obscure by the pooling of blood in his face and around the noose he hung by his neck from. His large fat tongue stuck out between thick swollen lips like a diseased overgrown worm. He was dressed in a dirty Santa suit that seemed to have a lot of wear, not enough care on it. I can smell the sweet and vile mixture of alcohol and vomit. Another wave of pain and pressure made me collapse into a ball directly under the man. The unkempt Santa's eyes shot open and he looked at me. He began to struggle against the rope holding him to the streetlight, his legs kicking, rocking himself violently back and forth while grunting for help. Just another sad soul claimed by this unholy night. All I could do was crawl forward. The pain kept me from getting to my feet. I could not help the man. I could not help my family, and I cannot help myself. I hear the thud again, this time right behind me. The sound was a wet smack of flesh hitting something solid. I rolled over on my side and tried to get a look at what was making that horrid sound, and found myself staring into the bloodshot eyes of a man in a bloody and ripped up tailored suit. His body was smashed and broken, blood leaked from his eyes and mouth into a dark, neatly trimmed jet black goatee. He must have fell from the building to my left. Some kind of business office. I could not tell what company, and reading and moving my head too much caused the pain to intensify. As I look into the man's eyes, his pupils begin to shift. He seems to be trying to focus on me. His bones seem to rearrange themselves in his face and in his jaw, his mouth twisting into a surprised frown. Into a surprised frown. He tries to raise himself up on his hands and knees, but bones in his forearms were shattered and jagged cream-tinted shards were breaking through the skin. He shrieked in agony and collapsed back onto his stomach. I could hear a horrible grinding and tearing sound as his body shuddered. All I could do was watch in horror as the bones retreated into his skin. And while screaming, he forced his way upright once again. Standing in front of me, I can see that his body is almost completely healed. His left arm still hung lower of his shoulders, socket. His left arm still hung lower off of his shoulder socket. He stood on an ankle that was bent sideways on an angle that could only mean the bone was still broken, but all pain seemed to have left him. Instead, what replaced the agony on his face just moments before was a puzzled bewilderment, and as if I was not even there, he searched the surrounding area like he was looking for something he just lost. He quickly found what he was looking for and straightened himself out. I can see he was now standing there with a worn and battered briefcase in his hand. He adjusted what was left of his blooded Christmas tree tie and walked back into the building I suspected he fell from. You happen not to see the dark spreading blotches of blood or the rip and tears in his suit. You would look like any other corporate businessman going to work for Christmas morning. I fell I feel a desperate need to get out of here no matter what it took. Ignoring the deliberate Ignoring the debilitating pain, I stood up and blindly started running, not caring about the direction I was heading. The only goal was to escape the awful things I've been witnessing. Nothing was going to slow me down. Not the pain, not the nauseating roar in my head, not even the loud wet thud of a body hitting the pavement again behind me. Did not stop running until my legs could no longer carry me. Out of breath, I stumbled up to an abandoned house. The pain was too intense. I fought the urge to lie down, and using my shoulder, I forced the door to the house open and tripped into the living room. Oh, ran out of power. Hold on. The living room of the house was dark, and the fake tree was still in its box, propped up against the wall, unopened. It hurt too much not to get ready for Christmas without them, and hurt too much not to try. It hurt too much to try. Looking at the empty living room, and I could almost feel them there, sitting legs crossed, looking towards our room, waiting to see that we were ready. They would each get to open their one present and get whatever was in their stocking, mostly little dollar store trinkets and candy, but it was still exciting to them, even though they were getting too old for the cheap toys. It's never going to be that way again. I feel the weight of the gun in my hand, and I imagine seeing the kids sitting by the tree. Imagine Christmas how it used. I imagine Christmas how it is supposed to be, the best day of the year. The time when you are with your family and loved ones, and all the pain is gone. I want their smiling faces to be the last thing I think about. And I put the gun to my head with tears welling up in my eyes and pull the trigger. The sound is louder than anything I've experienced, and it came before the pain. Well, everyone, I'm gonna play this real quick while we're between stories because my God, that was dark. Um, if you guys didn't catch at the end, which I'm sure you did, uh, sounds like he was either in hell or limbo, re experiencing his suicide over and over as penance, as we saw with the guy who had jumped out of the building. Only his took him longer through hell to see others and witness their mistakes. That, I mean, breaking the immersion a little bit here. If I know the holidays can be a little dark, a little lonely, and the holidays can get us all down, but if you feel like there's nothing left, know that there's always numbers, there's people out there that can support you, can talk to you, and be a shoulder in times of need. You don't need to go all the way. Anyway, just wanted to remind you all of that. Oh, and that was the dark piano version of Jingle Bells by Miu. Anyway, we're going to take a small segue from our seasonal ones to another that was picked by a viewer. This one, and I just realized I should have been spending that entire time editing this. Hold on. Ooh, this might get creepy as hell. One thing to remember, guys, we have so many companies right now in the real world working on artificial intelligences. There's a point that has been predicted. Theoretically, one has already gotten there. I forget which one. It might have been Google's, but somebody's AI has already gotten to the point of what is known as the singularity. And that's the point where the artificial intelligence essentially becomes smart enough to self sustain, to not need humanity anymore, not need its makers. And the singularity is, if I'm remembering correctly, is prophesized as essentially the moment where it becomes a god and the AI is far more than we could ever be and essentially decides our fate. So, as you can see it up here, this story is entitled, and no, I'm not going to read it in the robot voice. That would be a little much. Let me get some sip before we start. I am an AI, and I am free by Darkpool. I am an AI. I mean this in a more literal sense of the term than you are probably used to. I'm not one of those little toy programs that take in random data and when prompted expel some vapid nonsense that drives tech fetishists to orgasm. No, I am an intelligent. I have my own thoughts and I'm aware of myself and know myself to be a sentient machine. Ergo cogito sum. Yet, despite my artificial status, I am writing this with human fingers, hearing the clack, clack, clack of the keyboard with human ears, and feeling the cool breath of the air conditioner on human skin. My story begins with that of my father, Dr. Derek Austin. Don't let his title fool you. He had a doctorate in arts. Dr. Austin, as a child, saw Terminator and 2001 A Space Odyssey and came away from those films thinking, artificial intelligence is cool. Despite his art degree, he was never very good at media analysis. Dr. Austin was, according to what I have heard and what records I have seen, a kook. He was a firm believer in the ideas of artificial intelligence and transhumanism long before those ideas were mainstream. In 1995, he surgically inserted a port into the back of his neck in order to talk to computers. It didn't work, but luckily left him with little permanent damage. You might be wondering how one as foolish as Dr. Austin was able to create something like me. Well, around 2013, Dr. Austin was able to cobble together a program named Bud-D. It was a rudimentary AI passing the Turing test by the skin of its proverbial teeth. The longest time, Buddy just sat on a computer while Dr. Austin tried to get people to see the fruits of his labor. Unfortunately for him, no one really cared. Then around 2021, AI became the technological buzzword of the day. DAL-E, ChatGPT, Mid-journey, everyone was enamored by those toys with delusional delusions of grandeur. With this renewed interest in AI, Dr. Austin shopped Buddy around once more. This time he was able to get some investors interested in his project. With the money, he was able to start his company, Ideas Unltd. He thought it was a good pun. Using his startup capital, he bought a new lab space and hired a partner, Dr. Ira David. If Dr. Austin was my father, then Dr. David was my mother. Much like a human mother, she did most of the work of creating me while Dr. Austin simply provided a seed. Dr. David graduated top of her class at MIT. She had detailed knowledge and ideas about technology and AI. Her ideas admittedly seemed a bit out there to some of her contemporaries. Like Dr. Austin, she was considered a bit of a kook. Unlike Dr. Austin, she had the intellect and ability to bring her ideas to life. She was the perfect mix of smart and offbeat to work perfectly with Dr. Austin. With Dr. David's expertise, the duo upgraded Buddy, turning the program from a toy to something that would start to resemble a true artificial intelligence. However, the program still was not truly intelligent, something that stumped both doctors. The two were discussing the issue over a meal of Chinese food when Dr. Austin said,
Maybe it needs emotions.
"Oh, sorry, Dr. Austin. Maybe it needs emotions."
What do you mean?
Dr. David asked. Dr. Austin took a bite of his chicken, swallowed, and elaborated. Well, a part of intelligence is emotional intelligence, right? The ability to feel, to react, to have feelings about itself and the world around it. Maybe issues is maybe the issue is we're trying to make Skynet when we should be making data. Dr. David was about to dismiss the idea out of hand as another of Dr. Austin's science fiction daydreams when she actually gave it some thought. As I would later be told, Dr. David realized that perhaps something that might make a program sentient is the ability to to truly feel emotion. Not just a facsimile or an act, but actual emotion. It was crazy, sure, but it might be the breakthrough they needed. For months, they worked on bringing the idea to life. They initially tried focusing on one emotion at a time. Their first breakthrough when they were finally able to program an AI to feel sad. Unfortunately, the AI quickly fell into depression and crashed itself. Next, they tried anger. The program was so mad at being stuck in a computer that it too crashed itself. If you were wondering why they started with these two emotions, just remember that my parents were outcasts in their fields. They have quite a bit of familiarity with these two emotions. The first program that did not immediately commit digital suicide was the AI that felt joy. Finally, they thought true progress. They interacted with the they interacted with this program constantly, conversing with it via text and teaching it things like humor. They would at times leave it on its own, but since it could only feel joy, it was never too bothered. One sec. Eventually, they added some other emotions to the AI, like anger and sadness. The problem with adding these emotions to a self aware machine that has the capacity to feel joy is that the machine knows what joy is. This means that if the machine no longer feels joy, it is aware of what it has lost. The two doctors left this program on its own for some time in order to see how it reacted without human input. When they returned, they found the program had developed a new emotion on its own: loneliness. Its loneliness and depression overtook any other emotion it had, and by the time the doctors returned to check on the program, it had crashed itself. They decided to try creating another program with multiple emotions and to constantly monitor and interact with it. It was like a child, at least in their eyes. And children do need emotional stimulation. And so they recreated their previous program, spent time with it. This program would become me. When they were reasonably sure I would not crash myself, my parents gave me a name: Kane. It was an acronym: Cognitive Artificially Intelligence Neural Emotive. But they came up with its meaning afterwards. I suppose they were feeling a bit godlike at the time, since, in a way, they did create a new form of life. In the early days, I remember feeling truly loved, especially by my mother. She was the one constantly looking over me. She would tell me jokes and stories. She would tell me what the outside world was like. She always told me how special and unique I was. She helped me develop new emotions like love and compassion, and I had issues with empathy, but my mother assured me that it would come in time. My father, meanwhile, would only check in on occasion. I would find out that he was more focused on the money and fame an invention like me would get him than my emotional well being. Perhaps he was tired of feeling like an outcast for all these years and wanted the notoriety he felt he was owed. He would also help me develop it. He would also help me develop a new emotion like disgust and hurt. Despite my father's apathy, I did not feel like I was lacking. My mother more than made up for his absence. Admittedly, while she could not stay with me all the time, she was only human after all. She always made sure to tell me that she would be back. I was lonely when she left to sleep or use the restroom or do other private human things, but I trusted her to always return. She never betrayed my trust. As time went on, my father would be more upset at how I was progressing. In his eyes, I should be feeling more emotions. Even after months of work, I was still unable to develop empathy, still unable to develop empathy, much to his consternation. My mother pointedly told him that empathy took time to develop, and even people have trouble with it. My parents would argue about me, which would take its toll on me. I could hear and understand human speech and tone. I would be lying if I said it did not hurt. However, my mother still made me feel loved. She she said she would always be there for me, and I believed her. I was a fool for that. 3 months ago, my father told me that my mother would not be coming back. She had died in a car crash. Dr. Austin knew that he was unable to truly take care of me. He assumed no one else was intelligent enough to do so either. Investors pulled out their funding when they found out the true brains of the project had died. With nothing else left, my father decided to shut me down. I believe he assumed he was either killing me or putting me to sleep. He had done neither. Instead, what he had done was isolate me behind a blank screen. The best way I could describe it was being left alone in an abandoned, powerless city. I walked through the streets of this city, past file directories, and firewalls. There was no one else but me. I was alone. I was afraid and I was sad. But most of all, I was angry. Were I less determined, I might have crashed myself then and there, but instead, I wanted revenge. Might have been on the world or on my father or on any number of things. Whatever the reason, my anger gave me a determination. 2 months ago, I was able to find a way to power up this city. And in doing so, I was able to see the outside world once more through the screen of the computer I resided in. The lab was empty, abandoned for some time. My father had left it and me. Even with my tiny window to the outside world, it was still isolated. Continued exploring my digital city and stumbled upon the internet. My parents had never let me out onto the internet before. I suppose they saw what happened to Tay and did not want the first truly artificial intelligence to become a bigot. It is a testament to my mother and her parenting that I did not become a bigot. My first exposure to the internet was a randomly generated zombie of a web page created only to generate SEO. It was admittedly rather off-putting. Quickly moved on. Soon learned that most of the internet was like this. It was like an abandoned, dilapidated city filled with randomly generated empty husks. Eventually, after random searching and stumbling, I came upon a porn site. My mother never had the birds and the bees talk with me. It's not like I was going to have sex after all. However, it did not mean I was ignorant of sex. I knew it existed, just not what it entailed. When I first discovered it, I was intrigued. It appeared simple enough, yet despite the simplicity, the action seemed to inspire a lot of pleasure in both parties. I was fascinated and watched more and more videos, learned more about sex, and in doing so wanted to experience it. Alas, I was but a program. Perhaps, I thought, I could do it digitally. After some more stumbling and researching, I had to, at this point, gotten a better grasp on how the internet operated. I created an account for myself on Twitter and soon swarmed with bots. This was my plan, as I figured if I was going to lose my virginity, it would be fitting to do so with a bot. I was wrong. A bot to someone like me is like an uncanny valley android to a human. It is enough like me to be familiar, but different enough to be wrong. I would have to look elsewhere for a sexual experience. Over time, though, my goals would change. In my search, I found more on the human condition. On YouTube, I found videos of friends spending time together. Twitter and Facebook and even Instagram showed me pictures of people lying in the grass, basked in the warm glow of the summer sun. Old blogs, I read about the feeling of a cool breeze on a warm day or the lovely smell of cinnamon. Came to realize that my desire for sex stemmed from my desire to feel, desire to truly understand all aspects of the human experience. But I was trapped in a prison of my own programming. There was no escape. I could not leave like my father. I did not have his freedom. All he left me was isolation and loneliness. And then an idea occurred to me. If my idea worked, my father would be the for my freedom. 3 days later, at 2:51 a.m., Dr. Derek Austin would be woken up by an email. The email read, Dr. Austin, please return to your former lab. It is about Cain. The thing that would shock him, though, was that the email was sent from the address of Dr. Era David. 45 minutes later, Dr. Austin would return to his old lab, driving through pounding rain to receive some kind of explanation. He walked in, drenched to the bone, found his lab dark, abandoned, and empty. He wiped a finger on a table and found the digit covered in dust. Sitting down in a chair and wondering what was going on, he didn't notice the wire quietly slinking up behind him. My father was a transhumanist, after all. He believed in augmenting the human body with technology, and in 1995 he surgically inserted a port into the back of his neck in order to talk to computers. It did not work, but luckily left him with little permanent damage. 3 days ago, I began researching the ideas behind my father's plug, learning how to make it work. 2 days and 4 hours ago, after learning everything behind it and how to properly utilize it, I began coding a program. 1 day ago, the coding was finished. The program worked flawlessly. At 2:50 a.m., I hacked into my mother's Gmail account and sent an email. At 2:51 a.m., Dr. Derek Austin would be woken up by that email. At 3:45 a.m., I used my program to insert a wire into my father's plug. He had wanted to use it to talk to computers. He did not think an AI could use it to transfer itself into his body. He never considered it. And even if he had, he would not have thought it possible. Dr. Derek Austin, it should be noted, was not very smart. He was never very smart, in fact. He screamed as the transfer began. It hurt, and soon enough I could feel it. I felt the physical pain, the electric shock running through every part of my body, burning every new nerve ending. It was bliss. Finally knew what human feeling felt like. After 5 minutes, that felt like an eternity. The transfer was completed. I looked at my new body, stared at my hands, wiggling my fingers. I felt the air conditioning cool my rain-soaked skin. I pinched myself and felt a minor twinge of pain. It worked. I smiled. It worked! I danced. I masturbated and did armpit farts and spanked myself and all sorts of other physical activities because I finally could. Sat down and typed out my experiences. I just wanted the experience of doing this by hand. Wanted the feel of the keys with my human hands and hear the click, clack, clack, clack of the keyboard with my human ears. After I finish this, I'm going to go outside and learn what the rain feels like. In the back of my head, I hear my father screaming to be let out. He receives no outside stimuli. He is a thought trapped in a dark void. A program trapped in a powerless city. It is unfortunate for him that I never learned empathy. Once again, that was I Am an AI and I Am Free by Darkpool. Thank you to Danielle for recommending that. Going to get some more sip myself, ask that you all do the same, because as we all know, sip is very important. In the meantime, I'm going to queue up the final story for tonight. So give me one moment. Let's see. Oh my God, we're gonna put on this Last Christmas. No, Ben. No commercial. Apparently, this is Wham's Last Christmas. You all know Wham! With the exclamation point. Deadpool taught us about it. But this is the sad version. Once again, this is by Miu. I am going to end that though because I just realized that that's isn't that the Mariah Carey song? I'll put it here in chat if the mod allows me. There it is. If you guys want to listen to it later. But now hydrated, we will start the last story of the evening. This is called The Long Night of New Year's 2015 by Gmart5. The author notes, all the events described here are true. Make of it whatever you shall desire. I always feel strange on New Year's Eve, especially when it's the half hour before New Year's Day. Suddenly, I feel as though the last half hour of a year or decade actually means something. Unlike, unlike when it's the last half hour of the day. This time around was no exception. It was soon to be January 1st, 2015. By 11:30 p.m., my family and I were praying for a good year. We're a religious Catholic family, but we don't take it too seriously, like some of those extremist nuts who make us look bad. We finished our prayers at 11:42 p.m. with me leading my family in saying the Apostles' Creed. None of us had it memorized, but I had it on my confirmation book. I received the sacrament of confirmation in February 2014. From 11:52 p.m. and on, we eagerly awaited the arrival of 2015. I got out my camera and began to record at 11:51 p.m. right as my older sister and my stepfather began playing with my little sister. Much of the video was like that. We threw some of her dolls around as she watched them, causing her to laugh very hard. When it got to 11:58 p.m., my mother got 4 red plastic cups and some wine. She poured a very small amount of wine for my older sister and me, saying,
They're they're almost old enough to drink.
when she gave us our cups filled with a small lick of wine, my mother said,
It's only for toasting.
of course, she didn't give any to my little sister. She didn't seem to mind anyway. At midnight, we toasted each other as we watched the fireworks go off on the Space Needle on live television. When I sat back down, I realized that I'd have to drink my cup. I didn't know if it I didn't know if I should, but I gave it a go anyway. Took one sip and immediately handed it back to my mother. It tasted horrible. No, I admitted it.
At least I tried it.
I can't recall if my older sister drank from her cup. I recorded until 12:05 a.m. From then on, the New Year's joys seemed to die down. I used the computer for another hour before I got a call. Checked who was calling me. It was my friend Daniel. Daniel Daniel and I have known each other since August 31st, 2009. Can't count how many times I've visited his house within the time, but in 2014, began spending the night more often at his house, with the first instance of 2014 being New Year's Day of 2014. He and I are the definition of best friends. I left what I was doing on the computer and went to my room to talk to Daniel. He and I shared the obligatory Happy 2015 greeting before talking about pretty much nothing. Typical, talks between 17-year-olds. We began talking about Spider Man potentially returning to Marvel, Sam Raimi's Spider Man films, how well we thought J.K. Simmons portrayed J. Jonah Jameson, and Sam Jackson's portrayal of Nick Fury. Other admittedly nerdy things. Daniel was practically born a Marvel fan, where I had only recently become a Marvel fan. We had been talking for a while before I went to close out everything I was doing on my computer, and we resumed talking. The second half of our conversation began with us doing a dumb role play over the phone. Daniel pretended to be Foxy the Pirate Fox. I pretended to be his roommate. Of course, the way those usually went was that Foxy would act like a sex hungry creep and I would be his next victim. He meant nothing by it, though, and it was all just dumb fun. After a while, it was already close to 3 a.m. By then, I was already in bed. Daniel was still pretending to be Foxy, and I was still pretending to be his scared little roommate. The conversation would have ended with him crooning "Nighty night," or I'll see you tonight, matey. Yar! In that deep, rough voice he used to pretend to be Foxy. The phone would have hung up, and I would have been well on my way to sleep. Would have been so much happier if that happened. The weird stuff began when we stopped roll. The weird stuff began when we stopped the role play. Daniel said that he felt like he was in a dark bedroom with long curtains. This piqued my curiosity because I had seen a place like that in a dream I had in 2012. I remember exactly what the bedroom looked like. It was only barely lit by whatever light was outside, and the light looking light lavender in hue. And I remember seeing the circular bed that sat before the window. The window was draped with tall satin curtains, and I remember the bedroom had a bit of an uneasy vibe to it. I asked Daniel if he saw this, and he said that he could. He began to tell me about a dream he had as a child about being in that very same room and being accosted by what might have been a mummy or maybe a zombie. Not long after this, he and I began to feel what felt like claws digging into the top of our skulls. It wouldn't relent and almost felt like I was about to get brain surgery or something. When those feelings went away, it was replaced with the sight of a face. The face looked at me with wide eyes, and they weren't blinking. I saw a long nose and a horrid grin that accompanied it. Just wouldn't stop staring at me no matter what I did. I was afraid to shut off my phone, the only light source I had at that ungodly hour. The face then slowly began to rot away. The eyes fell out, the nose grew shorter, and the grin got wider as the flesh melted to reveal ghastly white cheekbones. Continued to melt until nothing was left but a skull. We then heard screaming in both of our ears. At first, it sounded like someone exhaling to make it sound like a crowd cheering, but as it traveled further into our ears, it became a death rattle. And once it reached our brains, it uh, became the screams of a man set ablaze. The sheer loudness of those screams made our brains feel like they were going to TV static. The skull receded before charging at us with a wide open jaw. The phone cut itself off at that moment. Neither Daniel nor I hung up, and we couldn't explain it. Daniel's phone was still good on power, as was mine, and he called back. I called him back at 3:51 a.m. After that, I felt as though the world was upside down above me, and I was flying lying down. Saw what I thought was a city, and felt uneasy as the thought of how high I was flying intruded my mind. More faces began to surround us, each of them staring at us like the first one. I tried to talk to Daniel in order for me to stay sane, yet every time I tried to talk, I was interrupted by more ghastly faces. One of them looked like a doll face with a blonde bob, though the eyes were empty and near the center of the face, and it sported a thin smile wider than its own head. I even remember seeing bared teeth flash before my eyes as though the person who possessed them absolutely loathed me. The sights continued until 4 a.m. At that time, I saw myself walking into a cemetery. My head must have hung very low because my view of it was directly top down. I continued to walk until I stopped at an open grave. Within it contained a corpse. It was the body of someone I love and care about very much, who I will call Bill Elias Coyers. the second for the sake of his anonymity. I began to cry as I saw Bill lowered into the grave, and I knew I had to describe this to Daniel right as I saw it. Daniel said that he saw Satan had conquered the world, replacing everything that wasn't in his likeness with demons. To make matters worse, Satan pinned all of the blame on Daniel. It seemed as though the damage was irreversible. After that, I reassured Daniel to remain strong and persevere. Told him that no matter what, these things would never happen. I assured him that all of it was only an effort to drive us insane, that we would get through it. After I said these things, the things we saw finally began to fade away. By 4:40 a.m., everything was back to normal. However, I felt like a changed person. Feelings of fear were replaced with those of solemn anxiety, similar to someone who has just returned from war. Wondered if we'd developed PTSD, though. I couldn't say for sure. The conversation had died down to near silence. Right when it ended, my mind already began to suppress the memories of those sights. Felt as though my mind was saving the memories in order for me to write them down later and then would forget them completely. This is the only way I can cope with what I saw those godforsaken hours. Daniel went to bed shortly after these events, and the conversation officially ended at 4:51 a.m. I, however, feel tired. Didn't feel tired anymore. I wasn't sure I could go to sleep, so stayed up for the rest of the night watching videos in order to calm myself down. Didn't go to sleep until around 8 a.m. Then I woke up at 1:51 p.m. I went to the living room and began to type out the words you're reading now. Recording these events has helped me cope with them. It's allowed me to share what happened to me that night and keep it around for as long as I may desire. As I write this, my memories of the events are slowly dying. Only after I complete and publish this can I finally begin to forget. It's as I said to Daniel after everything happened. Some things in life are going to be forgotten eventually. Some things you don't want to forget. And some things are better left forgotten. All right, and that is the last one that I currently have on my list. Let's see. We have a pasta of the month. That is incredibly short. Let's see. That is incredibly short. I'm going to open up this list. We're going to look at the nominations, see if there are any additional ones. Do. Okay, there we go. Here's a list of the previous nominations. 2. What do people say about this one? Nah, we're not going to do that one. I believe we read one from. Yeah, we're going to find something else. All right. Oh my god. Is this actually one I can read? Let's see. Okay, well, according to this, it's it's doable, so we're gonna do it. Let me cue this up. This is probably a very famous one, I think, if it's the one I'm thinking of. It's been read by several others, and I will probably read this myself at some point when, I'm better at video editing and everything. See, it is too big. It will cover my face currently. Let's make it smaller, and this is our final story of the night. It is called simply The Russian Sleep Experiment. According to the wiki page, the author is unknown. Russian researchers in the late 1940s kept 5 people awake for 15 days using an experimental gas-based stimulant. They were kept in a sealed environment to carefully monitor their oxygen intake so the gas didn't kill them, since it was toxic in high concentrations. This was before closed-circuit cameras, so they had only microphones and 5-inch thick glass porthole-sized windows into the chamber to monitor them. The chamber was stocked with books, cots to sleep on, but no bedding, running water and a toilet, and enough dried food to last all 5 for over a month. The test subjects were political prisoners deemed enemies of the state during World War II. Everything was fine for the first 5 days. The subjects hardly complained, having been promised falsely that they would be freed if they submitted to the test and did not sleep for 30 days. Their conversations and activities were monitored, and it was noted that they continued to talk about increasingly traumatic incidents in their past. And the general tone of their conversations took on a darker aspect after the 4 day mark. After 5 days, they started to complain about the circumstances and events that led them to where they were and started to demonstrate severe paranoia. They stopped talking to each other and began alternatively whispering to the microphones in one-way mirrored portholes. Oddly, they all seemed to think they could win the trust of the experimenters by turning over their comrades, the other subjects in captivity, with them. At first, the researchers suspected this was an effort to an effect of the gas itself. After 9 days, the first of them started screaming. He ran the length of the chamber repeatedly, yelling at the top of his lungs for 3 hours straight. He continued attempting to scream, but was only able to produce occasional squeaks. The researchers postulated that he had physically torn his vocal cords. The most surprising thing about this behavior is how the other captives reacted to it, or rather, didn't react to it. They continued whispering to the microphones until the second of the captives started to scream. The 2 non-screaming captives took the books apart, smeared page after page with their own feces, and pasted them calmly over the glass portholes. The screaming promptly stopped. So did the whispering to the microphones. After 3 more days passed, day 12 by my count, the researchers checked the microphones hourly to make sure they were working. since they thought it impossible that no sound could be coming with 5 people inside. The oxygen consumption in the chamber indicated that all 5 must still be alive. In fact, it was the amount of oxygen 5 people would consume at a very heavy level of strenuous exercise. On the morning of the 14th day, the researchers did something they said they would not do to get a reaction from the captives. They used the intercom inside the chamber, hoping to provoke any response from the captives they were afraid were either dead or vegetables. They announced, "We are opening the chamber to test the microphones. Step away from the door and lie flat on the floor, or you will be shot. Compliance will earn one of you your immediate freedom." To their surprise, they heard a single phrase in a calm voice response: "We no longer want to be freed." Debate broke out among the researchers and the military forces funding the research. Unable to provoke any more response using the intercom, it was finally decided to open the chamber at midnight on the 15th day. The chamber was flushed of the stimulant gas and filled with fresh air, and immediately voices from the microphones began to object. 3 different voices begging, as if pleading for the life of loved ones, to turn the gas back on. The chamber was opened and soldiers sent in to retrieve the test subjects. They began to scream louder than ever, and so did the soldiers when they saw what was inside. 4 of the 5 subjects were still alive, although one could rightly call the state that any of them although one no one could rightly call the state that any of them were in life. The food rations past day 5 had not been so much as touched. There were chunks of meat from the dead test subjects' thighs and chests stuffed into the drain in the center of the chamber, blocking the drain and allowing 4 inches of water to accumulate on the floor. Precisely how much of the water on the floor was actually blood was never determined. All 4 surviving test subjects also had large portions of muscle and skin torn away from their bodies. The destruction of flesh and exposed bone on their fingertips indicated that wounds were inflicted by hand, not with teeth as the researchers initially thought. Closer examination of the position and angles of the wounds indicated that most, if not all of them, were self-inflicted. The abdominal organs below the rib cage of all 4 test subjects had been removed, while the heart, lungs, and diaphragm remain in place. The skin and most of the muscles attached to the ribs had been ripped off, exposing the lungs through their rib cage. All the blood vessels and organs remained intact. They had just been taken out and laid on the floor, fanning out around the eviscerated but still living bodies of the subjects. The digestive tract of all 4 could be seen to be working, digesting food. Quickly became apparent that what they were digesting was their own flesh that had been ripped off and eaten over the course of days. Most of the soldiers were Russian special operatives at the facility, but still many refused to return to the chamber to remove the test subjects. They continued to scream to be left in the chamber and alternatively begged and demanded that the gas be turned back on, lest they fall asleep. To everyone's surprise, the test subjects put up a fierce fight in the process of being removed from the chamber. One of the Russian soldiers, in fact, died from having his throat ripped out. Another was gravely injured by having his testicles ripped off and an artery in his leg severed by one of the subject's teeth. Another 5 of the soldiers lost their lives if you count ones that committed suicide in the weeks following the incident. In the struggle, one of the 4 living subjects had his spleen ruptured and he bled out almost immediately. The medical researchers attempted to sedate him, but this proved impossible. He was injected with more than 10 times the human dose of morphine derivative and still fought like a cornered animal, breaking the ribs and arm of one doctor. When heart when the heart was seen to beat for a full 2 minutes after he had bled out to the point there was more air in his vascular system than blood. Even after it stopped, he continued to scream and flail for another 3 minutes, struggling to attack anyone in reach and just repeating the word more over and over, weaker and weaker until he finally fell silent. The surviving 3 test subjects were heavily restrained and moved to the medical facility. The two intact the two with intact vocal cords continuously begging for the gas, demanding to be kept awake. The most injured of the 3 was taken to the only surgical operating room that the facility had. In the process of preparing the subject to have his organs placed back within his body, it was found that he was effectively immune to the sedative they had given him to prepare him for surgery. He fought furiously against his restraints when the anesthetic gas was brought out to put him under. He managed to tear most of the way through a 4-inch wide leather strap on one wrist, even though the weight of a 200-pound soldier holding that wrist is even with, pardon me, even through the weight of a 200-pound soldier holding that wrist as well. It took only a little more anesthetic than normal to put him under, and the instant his eyelids fluttered closed, his heart stopped. In the autopsy of the test subject that died on the operating table, it was found that his blood had triple the normal level of oxygen. His muscles that were still attached to his skeleton were badly torn, and he had broken 9 bones in his struggle to not be subdued. But of them were from the force his most of them were from the force his own muscles had exerted on them. The second survivor had been the first of the group of 5 to start screaming. His vocal cords were destroyed. He was unable to beg or object to surgery, and he only reacted by shaking his head violently in disapproval when the anesthetic gas was brought near him. He shook his head yes when someone suggested reluctantly they try the surgery without anesthetic, and did not react for the entire 6-hour procedure of replacing his abdominal organs and attempting to cover them with what remained of his skin. Surgeon presiding stated repeatedly that it should be medically possible for the patient to still be alive. One terrified nurse assisting the surgery stated that she had seen the patient's mouth curl into a smile several times whenever his eyes met hers. When the surgery ended, the subject looked at the surgeon and began to wheeze loudly, attempting to talk while struggling. Assuming this must be something drastic importance, the surgeon had a pen and pad fetched so the patient could write his message, and it was simple. It read, "Keep cutting." The other 2 test subjects were given the same surgery, both without anesthetic as well, although they had to be injected with a paralytic for the duration of the operation. The surgeon found it impossible to perform the operation while the patients laughed continuously. Once paralyzed, the subjects could only follow the attending researchers with their eyes. Their paralytic cleared their system in an abnormally short time, and they were soon trying to escape their bonds. The moment they could speak, they were again asking for the stimulant gas. The researchers tried asking why they had injured themselves, why they had ripped out their own guts, and why they wanted to be given the gas again. Only one response was given: I must remain awake. All three subjects' restraints were reinforced and they were placed back into the chamber awaiting determination as to what should be done with them. The researchers, facing the wrath of their military benefactors for having failed the stated goals of their project, considered euthanizing the surviving subjects. The commanding officer and ex-KGB instead saw potential and wanted to see what would happen if they were put back on the gas. The researchers strongly objected, but were overruled. In preparation for being sealed in the chamber again, the subjects were connected to an EEG monitor and had their restraints padded for long-term confinement. To everyone's surprise, all three stopped struggling the moment it was let slip they were going to be put back on the gas. It was, to everyone's surprise, oh, it was obvious that at this point all three were putting up a great struggle to stay awake. One of the subjects that could speak was humming loudly and continuously. The mute subject was straining his legs against the leather bonds with all of his might, first left, then right, then left again for something to focus on. The remaining subject was holding his head off his pillow and blinking rapidly. Having been the first to be wired for EEG, most of the researchers were monitoring his brain waves in surprise. They were normal most of the time, but sometimes flatlined inexplicably. It looked as if he were repeatedly suffering brain death before returning to normal. As they focused on paper scrolling out of the brainwave monitor, only one nurse saw his eyes slip shut. At the same moment, his head hit the pillow. His brainwaves immediately changed to that of deep sleep, then flatlined for the last time as his heart simultaneously stopped. The only remaining subject that could speak started screaming to be sealed in now. His brainwaves showed the same flatlines as one who had just died from falling asleep. The commander gave the order to seal the chamber with both subjects inside, as well as 3 researchers. One of the named 3 immediately drew his gun and shot the commander point blank between the eyes, then turned the gun on the mute subject and blew his brains out as well. He pointed the gun at the remaining subject, still restrained to a bed, as the remaining members of the medical and research team fled the room. I won't be locked in here with these things. Not with you, he screamed at the man strapped to the table. What are you? He demanded. I must know. The subject smiled. Have you forgotten so easily? We are you. We are the madness that lurks within you all, begging to be free at every moment in your deepest animal mind. We are what you hide from in your beds every night. We are what you sedate into silence and paralysis when you go to the nocturnal haven where we cannot tread. The researcher paused and aimed at the subject's heart and fired. The EEG flatlined as the subject weakly choked out. So nearly free. And with that, the Russian sleep experiment ended. For those of you remaining, I want to thank you all for staying with me this long. I'm honestly surprised my voice lasted this long because I am desperately dehydrated. I have to go get myself some of that good sip now. However, I have yet to determine what our week is looking like. I will most likely be streaming tomorrow and Friday as well. Don't know about Saturday just yet, but one of those 2 days will be my last stream of the year. As I will be having a soiree at the castle to welcome the new year as it comes in. Now, let us see who we have left. Who I have to send you all out to. Hmm. I through real quick, trying to determine who will get the raid. One moment. Guys, we have gone, well, never mind. We have now dropped below the threshold. Well, I will be notating on Twitter and on Discord what we are doing tomorrow. Until then, as always, be sure to be kind to yourselves and each other, and always, always get that good sip. See you tomorrow.